Welcome, everyone. This is Ask an Expert. I'm your host, Luminara Serdar. So happy to be here with you all. Thanks for showing up. And I'm the creator of the Autism Recovery Telesummit, which was held in January of 2016. And also autismtransform.com is my website, and heartfulhealing.com. So you'll find a lot of resources there. One moment. I'm just going to mute everyone and start again. Okay, great. Today we have SoniaStory with us, an expert in neurodevelopmental learning programs that help children as well as adults overcome a wide variety of challenges: learning, behavioral, emotional, social, physical, and mental health. All those challenges. I'm going to mute everyone again. After experiencing the profound benefits of neurodevelopmental movement with her own children and many other children and adults, Sonia created programs so other families could experience the same results. Sonia developed an online course, the Brain and Sensory Foundation's Neuro Movement Curriculum, to meet the needs of parents who don't have access to specially trained therapists. Maybe it's too costly, or maybe there's no one in your area. Sonia is certified as an instructor of rhythmic movement training and has been mentored directly with Harold Blomberg, MD, and Maura Dempsey, who are the authors of the book Movements That Heal, as well as training with many other leaders in integrative movement. So Sonia teaches these profound movements to, get this, all these people: parents, OTs, PTs, SLPs, educators, mental health therapists, caregivers, and probably lots more. Her company is Move, Play, Thrive. It's an approved provider through the American Occupational Therapy Association, and that's moveplaythrive.com. I'll post that in the chat box so people can access that. So welcome, Sonia. Oh, let me unmute you. Sorry.
Hey,
welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Would you start by giving us your little 2-minute story of how you got into neurodevelopmental movement?
Yeah, I would love to do that. I basically wanted to function better as a mom. We were homeschooling 2 daughters at the time, and one who had birth trauma. And she was in ICU for 12 days. So she tended to be very hypersensitive. And our second daughter tended to be hyperactive. She had a lot of stress in the womb life. And I felt really ineffective as a mom myself. And I did all these things to try and create harmony in our home. We all studied nonviolent communication. I was trying to model kindness and gentle speaking. And it just really wasn't working. The hypersensitive and hyperactive child were really triggering each other. And some days I was just in tears trying to figure out how this was even going to work to even homeschool. And but when I found the neurodevelopmental movement, that was a key piece, because instead of trying to rely on these sort of cognitive tools that I had been working to teach my children, which I soon realized that those tools went out the door when they were triggered. And so then when I got to actually learn what creates maturity and steadiness in the nervous system itself, we saw huge changes in both girls. I myself overcame low-grade anxiety that I think I'd carried my whole life, and I just didn't realize it until I got on the other side of it. So I was free from that anxiety, free from my own sort of overwhelm and scatteredness as a mom. And we had a much better time. And both of our daughters were, they made huge changes. So I was very blessed, because we had a time in our life where we were able to, my husband and I were both out of work. We made a huge transition and moved. And so I was able to take all these training courses in neurodevelopmental movement. So I took over 50 in a period of several years. And it was just amazing what I learned. And I've been learning and teaching ever since. So that's a little bit of my story.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. So why don't we just launch into, you're going to share your screen with us, and we'll launch into what you have to say about neurodevelopmental
So here
programming,
comes
movement.
screen. I think this will go right up. Yeah, okay. So then I'm just going to share a few slides. Hold on just a moment. Okay, how does that look to everyone?
Looks good.
Okay, so let me move along here with my slides. Okay, so this is just a little bit of the introduction here. What I've seen since working with myself and my own children, and I've been doing this for 10 years now, is we've just seen tremendous results. So I'm so confident that anyone who does this consistently will get results. I mean, the only exceptions to that are ones who are continually being traumatized or who are so incredibly ill that, they make a gain and then they lose it. But other than that, we've just seen tremendous results. So the theme here today is sensory processing issues and anxiety. So what I'm planning to do here is talk about how anxiety goes hand in hand with sensory challenges. And I know this from firsthand experience and just living within my own body. And also watching our first daughter overcome her sensory challenges and anxiety. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Moro reflex, which is a key factor in sensory processing challenges and anxiety. And then I'm going to show you some before and after results and also guide you where to learn more. I want to just go back, if I could. Let me go back. So what I wanted to just say here is that I wanted to just make sure that I define what neurodevelopmental movement is. And just very quickly, these are movements that come from a very specific source, and they come from imitating what babies do in the womb and very early infancy prior to the crawling stages. And so there's a tremendous amount that goes on to get the brain and the body and the sensory system ready, one, to be born, and then two, to adjust to, life on dry land, and three, to go through all those milestones that we look for and expect our children to do. So that's what neurodevelopmental movement is. And then within that category, there are three main types. So there are reflexes, which everybody is probably aware of. One simple one, which sucking is a reflex. And then when you put your finger in a baby's hand and they curl their hand, that also is a reflex. It's not done consciously by the baby, but it gets all the brain networks going and it gets the muscles in the hand developed. So there are many, many of these very specific patterns that are stimulated by some kind of sensory stimulus, and then there's a motor response. And that's a key thing here, because many of these infant reflexes should go away after the toddler years, but if they remain in the system, they create a kind of dissonance in the brain. They create brain immaturity. And so the brain can't mature as well as it would normally. And then the sensory system also cannot mature. So these are very specific patterns. They have a specific lifetime. They're tracked by, when you go to a pediatric neurologist, they check these at birth. They should be present at birth. Again, they should be dormant by the time the toddler age starts. But for so many children, and particularly children with challenges, these reflex movements have not gone dormant, which again is a sign of brain immaturity. I'm going to move along here. So then the other thing about these movements, as I mentioned, there's reflexes. Another category is rhythmic movements. These are movements that babies do. And actually, we also have an intuitive sense when we're caring for an infant to move them rhythmically. We have rocking chairs, we rock them, we bounce them up and down when we're holding them. And babies also have an innate rhythmic movement system that they do. So later on, I'll be teaching a very simple rhythmic movement that ones can start right away with. And but I just want to mention that that's another set of rhythmic neurodevelopmental movements. And then the last one would be developmental movements, and those are things people are familiar with, like rolling, sitting up, crawling. And they all three categories intertwine to ideally set a child up from the very beginning with the strength, with the brain maturity, with the calm, organized, mature brain and sensory system. But what's happening for so many of these children, and actually, sadly, it's a majority of children, even the neurotypical children, are having challenges with this innate movement system. But they don't get enough of these movements in infancy. Many of them are disrupted in the womb, and that's the crux of the challenge. So what happens is we have children who are left with kind of this raw, underdeveloped brain and sensory system, leading to hypersensitivity, sometimes hyposensitivity. They get frustrated when they try to do things. There's often a lack of focus or impulse control. They may have difficult time learning, speaking, socialize, sleeping, inability to be still. I was working with a 5-year-old boy once, and he laid down, and I said, "What does it feel like when you're laying down like this?" Because I had asked him to lay down so I could check something on his feet. And he, without any hesitation at all, he just said to me, "It feels like I'm going to explode." And so that was a huge teaching moment for me. And that inability to be still, what I learned from Dr. Blomberg about that is there's a specific part of the brain that needs to be developed in order to be still, and that's called the basal ganglia. And if that's not mature, you literally cannot be still. And if you try to be still, it's extremely uncomfortable. So that's an example. By the way, that same little boy was incredibly changed after just a month of doing rhythmic movement and a little bit of reflexes. His mom had brought him in to me because he was hurting himself all the time. And he'd hurt himself several times a day and just fall and cry and knock into things. And that in itself would cause anxiety, right? Like you wake up and go, what's going to happen today? But the point with this slide here is just to realize that all these things, these sensory issues, anxiety can occur with all of them because they don't allow us to engage in our environment in ways that are calm, nurturing, functional, and so these in themselves can create anxiety. In other words, anxiety can just be present just because we're not able to function well. But I mentioned that we're also going to go through this Moro reflex, and this is also called the startle reflex. And you can see by the picture here of the baby. And by the way, I just want to I'm going to interrupt myself because I just want to make sure everyone knows that even though we're working with an infant movement system, these movements will work for any age from 0 to elder. And they're so supportive for our functioning. We use them in so many instances. Right now we're talking about sensory issues and anxiety, but the basic challenge of brain immaturity or trauma to the brain really can work for all ages and help with so many different things. We use them for ones with Parkinson's, stroke, elderly challenges, all kinds of things. But anyway, going back to this picture, we have this movement pattern in our system from very early on. It begins in the womb, and when babies are born, it should be active because this is an alarm system for the body, and it helps alert a caregiver in case something's wrong. And it helps the nervous system, which learns by doing, develop a fight or flight pattern. And so it's there for many good purposes. It's called a Moro reflex, and that's spelled Moro. And so it does a lot for us in infancy. But if it is not able to mature, if it's not able to complete its life cycle and go dormant, the basic thing that happens is that the child or the adult, in my case, I had an unintegrated Moro reflex, like I said, that I didn't even know about. But when I integrated it, it was fundamental life change for me. Fundamental, huge change. And I've talked to other adults who have done this also. So it works at any age, but the longer you keep this in the system, the more stress the system is in, because it actually is a trigger for the fight or flight response. And so it may be hidden, the actual movement pattern may be hidden, but the underlying brain and physiological changes are going on. And one of those changes is excretion of adrenaline, or it's also called norepinephrine. But this is a neurotransmitter that, it puts us into a heightened awareness so that if we do have to fight or flee, we can see where the threat's coming from. So those chemicals, those brain chemicals, actually make us more sensitive to incoming sensory stimuli. And here's where the sensory processing disorders really link into this, because this is a key component of why sensory processing challenges are there in the first place. And this is one thing that, Dr. Blomberg really was able to explain very clearly when I was taking courses from him. And so what he said is, you cannot fully deal with sensory issues until you have worked with and integrated this Moro reflex, because otherwise the system is just still going to be in hyper alert, fight or flight, and that makes the system more sensitive. So over time, a child becomes more and more sensitive. And that's exactly what happened to our oldest daughter. Over time, her system just got more and more and more sensitive because this was underlying, and we didn't know about it, even though she'd been to doctors. She had all the tests after birth trauma, and she went to a pediatric physical therapist, but we didn't know about this movement system until much later. It wasn't until she was, I think, 12 or 13 when we started. So this had already taken quite a toll on her. Anyway, the point here is that all these different things that you see here, sensory processing challenges, poor focus and impulse control, all these things here, they start very early in infancy. And I just want to share that one of the sensory systems that's incredibly important, that most parents are probably familiar with if their children are receiving therapy, and for sure the therapists know about this, is the balance system. It's also sometimes called the vestibular system. But that vestibular system is so much more than just providing balance. Balance is super important. It also interweaves with every other sensory system except possibly the olfactory system. But this is so hopeful, because what they have recently done and shown in research is that after 12 weeks, they took a group of children who had anxiety. And after 12 weeks, instead of giving them cognitive therapy, they gave them a sensory motor intervention that helped improve their balance skills. And that therapy reduced the children's anxiety to normal levels, and their self-esteem also increased. So this is so hopeful to me. And, when I say the problems begin in infancy, here's my slide to kind of show how that's happening in a visual sense. So every time I show this slide, and this comes from Kathleen Porter, she's a posture and alignment expert. So remember I said when we're young, we've got these reflexes and they help us develop. Well, when we can move and do all of our reflex movements and our rhythmic movements and our developmental movements, we end up having a sensory system that works just fine, as long as we're not hindered from movement, as long as we're not stressed or traumatized, as long as we're healthy. We should naturally have proper alignment, proper balance, proper posture, a brain that's mature enough, a sensory system that's mature enough to just joyfully explore the environment, function well, learn, grow, and have our language and social skills in place just normally and naturally. But you can see the difference. I mean, if I ask you which babies are more, have their proper alignment, it's very easy to tell. Which babies will be more alert and getting more oxygen, right? If you slump yourself down like the babies on the bottom, you're not going to be able to take a deep breath. So everybody can do that experientially. So the babies on the top, they are babies that have had their full repertoire and full ability to practice neurodevelopmental movement. And the babies on the bottom have not. And what's happening so often is that the babies nowadays, more and more of them, and even a majority, are looking like the ones on the bottom, and they don't have their proper alignment, stability. They don't have their proper core strength. And I'm just going to tie this in for listeners because the Moro reflex is one of the key fundamental reflexes for being able to develop your strength in your core. And so you can see that the core strength is lacking in the ones on the bottom. So but like I said, there is a lot of hope. And once we use these movements we use them to mature and calm and organize the brain and sensory systems, we get amazing results. So these were submitted by Nina Galway, who's a teacher at the Siskiyou School in Ashland, Oregon. And you can see the difference in the quality of the drawing. And you can see, wow, there is so much more steadiness and organization and calm functioning that's reflected in the drawing on the right. And then the one on the left is where they started. So basically what Nina does with these children is they're in a remedial education program, and she sees them 4 times a week for about 45 minutes. They don't just do movement, they do other things, but they do a lot of movement. And these reflexes and rhythmic movements are the basis of some of the movement work that they do. And they just are getting phenomenal results. All the kids who were having trouble reading are now reading at grade level. And they're so happy. They love the movements and they love doing her program. So here are some other examples. This is clearly some more organization with the drawing and the handwriting. And this was after 10 minutes. This was before the writing, before the sessions on the left. And after 10 minutes, and the ATNR refers to another reflex that we don't have too much time to go into, but that actually stands for asymmetrical tonic neck reflex. And you can see the difference. And then we have another one, also, a pre-writing on the left, and then on the right after 10 minutes of integrating movement. And you can see how quickly the brain soaks this movement up and uses it to function better and in a more organized fashion. And that's what this really is. I don't even like to think of it as a therapy, even though it's very therapeutic. It's beyond just a therapy. These are movements that are our innate, God-given human movement template. And so when we give them to somebody, the brain recognizes it just like the brain recognizes food. And so the brain really can grow and mature when it receives these movements on a consistent basis. So I think I'm cruising along here, and Luminar, I think maybe I'll just see if I'm doing okay with timing, because I don't really have a timepiece in front of me. Oh, I see it's almost 12:26. So,
Yeah. let's pause if that's a good place, and
Yeah.
then you gave some excellent examples of the before movement and the after doing the integrative therapy. And I'm wondering if you could maybe do a movement or give a tip, just give something that people could take home right now, and then we'll open it up to questions and people can ask about their own specific kids.
Sure. Okay. So I have a video of a very, very simple movement that ones could start with. But I also just want to mention, because I think you're going to type in a link where ones can learn more and sign up for a larger class where you can really learn these patterns. And but on that link, there is on the right side, you can sign up for our e-newsletter. And I don't send out too many newsletters. It's usually, 1 or 2 a month at the most. It's usually 1 a month. But what I wanted to say about that is you get a free kind of outline of 10 things you can do right now to help mature your child's brain. And so one of those things is just get on the floor and play with them and do things on the floor, especially when they're on their bellies. Because a lot of prone movements are things that are missing. So, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show just I think it's about under 3 minutes, but it's a video showing another really relaxing rhythmic movement that ones can do at home. So I'm going to play this, and I think I'll just be quiet here and play my video and trust that it'll all come out through the technology here.
Perfect.
Okay.
It's important to look at the position of the feet and the ankles. Right here, there's some space between the foot and the mat. If there's space, you want to put a pillow under. That's really important. And then usually what we try to do, if it's comfortable, is to have the toes kind of facing each other. They don't have to touch. Some children cannot, or adults, they cannot put their feet in that position. They just can't do it. So you just work with what you have. All right, so I'm going to come and touch your hips. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. All right. So I'm going to come and touch here. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to give a little push on your hip. Mm-hmm. And you can tell me if you want it faster, slower, harder, softer. Just right. Push. Mm-hmm. Now the other way I can do it is do a pull towards me. And so there's that and that. I can also use 2 hands, and I can do it this way. Okay. How does that feel? Mm-hmm. Better with 2 hands. Okay, and then the other choice is to be right on the sacrum and just round from the sacrum if there's a possibility. Or you could, if there's a belt loop or a waistband, you could just do it this way. You like the 2 hands the best? Mm-hmm. Okay. So then we sing. What kind of song would you like? And you're going to take over the movement, okay? So 1, 2, 3, and go.
All right. So that's a little bit of how you could do that kind of very gentle, passive, rhythmic movement. For those who are listening with small children, any kind of rhythmic movement could be beneficial. Like you could keep them in arms and kind of jostle them just like you would a little baby if you were trying to soothe a baby. Make sure you have smooth rhythmic movement. There's no set rhythm that is best for any one individual. You want to find the rhythm that's best for the one you're working with. So you can do, start slow, go a little faster, have them tell you what they like. And then I just want to explain that on that video you saw that the model, her head was resting on her hands, her forehead was resting on her hands. Some children won't feel comfortable with that and they'll want their head to be turned one side to the other, and that's perfectly fine. And then you want to stay with doing the passive rhythmic movement. Now there in the video I was starting to transition her to do it on her own, and she clearly could keep the rhythm. But for someone who cannot keep the rhythm, you want to, as the parent or facilitator, you want to offer them the passive movement, because smooth rhythmic movement is what grows and matures the brainstem and the cerebellum, which are really very critical. And so you're not going to assume that a child, can do that on their own, because most of them cannot produce a smooth rhythmic movement like that. So you'll want to give them a lot of practice just with you doing the movement first. And we've seen tremendous benefits from these rhythmic movements. I had a mother who was her boy was biting his fingernails and his fingertips, and they were just bloody and raw, and she had to bandage them. And I taught her these movements, and she started doing them with her son. And I got to see her son 10 days later, and he didn't even have bandages anymore because he had stopped biting his nails. So very, very calming and effective for anxiety. And they also help to integrate the reflexes. So
question about that one in particular that you showed. So a few questions came up in my mind. One is, how often would you do that in a session? You do it for 30 seconds, a minute, that kind of thing. And then how often would you say a parent would repeat that once per day, once a week, 3 times a week, that kind of thing? And I thought there was another question. I noticed you were a little bit singing with it and doing some kind of, so if you could say something to that.
Sure. Let me start with the singing. Well, one thing, singing is joyful, and the more relaxed and joyful we are when doing movement, and the more playful it is, the more likely you will have brain growth and development and sensory development, and the less likely you're going to have anxiety. So the singing serves a purpose of just connecting and bonding, but it's also really good for our auditory processing. And you can see when you're singing how it gives auditory input for the beat that you're doing. I usually discourage playing music or a metronome, because you can adjust your voice very quickly if someone wants the movement faster or slower. And so that's the story about singing. Later on, when a child is ready to take the movement over on their own and see if they can do it rhythmically, you're going to still be there singing to see if they can keep the beat, and also to help them if they lose the rhythm. So, and starting and then restarting with a rhythm may need to happen a while before they're able to really sustain a smooth rhythmic movement for a while. So that's the singing. And then as far as how often and how long, it varies enormously, because some children are so sensitive that they can only start with a very small amount. But you can always, if your child is very sensitive, and it's usually the children who have a lot of tactile sensitivity or what they call gravitational insecurity, which is underdeveloped vestibular system. If they have something like that, then you have to start out very slowly and only do small bits at a time, like maybe just 3 to 10 seconds at a time. But you can extend that time at night while the child sleeps, and that will help them develop more and more brain maturity, and then they should be able to handle the movement. Usually it's like within 3 to 4 weeks of that, they should be able to handle the movement more during the day while they're awake. For most kids, they absolutely love it, and they will ask for more. But you want to stop when they're ready to stop. They may only want 30 seconds. Some kids will want way more than that. I've seen an infant who was delighted with a full 30 minutes of different kinds of rhythmic movement. I do encourage people to learn more than just one rhythmic movement. I highly recommend taking a class. I have a mini course where we teach 3. But in the regular course, we have a lot more. And so
And I want to pause right there and say that I typed into the chat box the link directly to your course? You want to just say something about the course you're offering and the timing, and this is a place where if people click on this link, they can go to your website and get that, get on your email list and get that, the thing you talked about them getting. You can say that, what that is again, and then tell them a little bit about the course.
Yeah, so the free item is just when you sign up for the newsletter, and it's 10 ways to help build your child's brain. And then the course it's a wonderful course. I set it up as a way to get this information out to parents, but I also mainly teach OTs who are really seeking out this information, and I get reports from them all the time. I have hundreds of case studies now, and they're so positive, and I'm really in awe of these movements. And what the course is it's 8 sessions, and it's meant to be done over a time period of about 2 months, but you could go faster or slower. And we have open enrollment for this course between now and May 31st. And then you get access to all the course materials. This graphic here that you see is the cover of the manual. So everybody gets sent a hardcover manual. And then you go through each of the 8 sessions online. And there's video training, and there's the manual, which has pictures and directions that go with the video. And then we have lecture and all kinds of resources and tips up in the virtual classroom. I also want to say that my goal is that when people do take the course, that they have what they need to develop their own movement program for their clients, if you're a professional, or for their children at home. And so that's my goal. And so anytime you're enrolled in the course, you can always ask questions, and we have live Q&A sessions too, so that ones can really apply it. And most people find that it's really easy and clear, and well worth empowering yourself if you're a parent to learn this work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask the other question, that reflex you showed in the video, or the movement, what reflex does that work with, or what would that help with particularly?
Okay, so the rhythmic movements are amazing because, our creator really knew what to do with us, because these movements work in such an intricate, wonderful way for our development. As long as they have a chance to do their work, they work really beautifully. So that's why when babies have this innate movement program, they're doing all the rhythmic movements and reflexes and developmental movements. They're all intertwined. So every rhythmic movement will help more than one reflex. And it also, in general, helps with general brain maturity. I mentioned the brainstem and the cerebellum as being very important. Well, here's just an example. So we see a lot of the children after they get these movements, even if they're nonverbal, they start to speak. And one of the reasons for that is that these lower brain centers have direct links to the cognitive centers towards the front of the brain. And when you mature the cerebellum, it links directly to the speech centers in the cortex. So that's one reason why the movements work so well, is because of connectivity. So for that particular movement, it's creating a lot of brain maturity, developing the brainstem, the cerebellum, and also the basal ganglia for the ability to sit still. So it's doing that, but it's also helping with just being prone, for one thing, which is really important for it's called the Landau reflex. And it's also helpful because you're swinging the hips side to side. It's also very helpful for the asymmetrical tonic neck reflex. So those are 2 reflexes that can be really helped by that. Another reflex that is very helpful, that rhythmic movement is very helpful to integrate, is called spinal galant, and possibly spinal parese, because both of those the spine can get really tense and tight if those reflexes remain unintegrated. And so it really loosens the hip and the whole spine. And they're just wonderful movements. They feel so good. And they're doing a lot of intensive brain work, even though they look so simple.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. We're officially supposed to be done now, but we'll maybe extend, if it's all right with you and with people online, maybe another 10 minutes to answer some questions. And if you don't have a mic, you can type it in. And I see Laura has typed in a question, and I'll just read it. Hi, I was wondering how to facilitate these movements if a young child is anxious and doesn't tolerate being touched, doesn't like prone position, and doesn't speak yet.
All right. So what I would do is don't put them in prone if they don't like prone. Put the child on the back and do it at night while the child sleeps. Well, the child may sleep in prone. Whatever position the child is sleeping.
Excuse me 1 second. Can you take your screen off so that people can see you speaking now?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So that I understand the question, the child is, can also, if anybody has questions about a specific child, it would help if I know the age. So maybe type in the age of the child, but the child doesn't like being on prone, does not like being touched, and is very anxious.
Yeah,
Speaking.
both of these children are about 12 to 14 months. So I have 2 kids I'm combining. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what I would suggest is, so 12 to 14 months is quite young. So, and that means if they don't like to be touched, that's a very big hindrance, because obviously when a baby's born, if the more that they're touched, rocked, and held, and sung to, and all those things, the more stimulation they have to grow the brain. But if they don't like being touched, you have to somehow mature their brain and sensory system so that they can enjoy touch. Because right now the brain and sensory system is in a really raw, immature, vulnerable state. So the best thing I know of to mature the brainstem, which has one of the functions of the brainstem is to take in sensory information and filter it. So you have to calm them down. And one of the best ways to regulate and mature the brainstem is with rhythmic movement. And that's actually been shown in research. They use it in trauma, and they've shown that the best way to regulate the brainstem is through repetitive rhythmic stimulation. So I would say if they don't like being touched, will they be held? Will they?
They will. Actually, I should probably clarify. They don't like being touched by the therapist, myself. They pretty much are Velcroed to their mom. So
Okay.
trying to handle them as a therapist is a little bit more challenging when we're working on crawling and all the other movements.
Right. Okay. The thing is it's, okay. I can understand you want to work with crawling because they need to crawl, but what needs to happen is we need to go back in their development to work on all the patterns that come before crawling, because crawling can't happen until they have their core strength and their more brain maturity. So the rhythmic movements will help all those later patterns come in. So if they're Velcroed to their mom, have her, every time she's holding them, have her do this. Have her bounce rhythmically with them. Do it while they're sleeping. Get a rocking chair, that kind of thing. So then, and also the reason babies don't like prone is because they have not had the opportunity to do it from day one. And so that their heads feel too heavy for their bodies, and so it's going to be uncomfortable. Whoops. I can
Screen sharing. Okay, we're back.
Okay. That was interesting. Okay, so you guys can still hear me. So what needs to happen is they need rhythmic stimulation to mature the brain so that you can get some of these movement patterns in, and it will mature their tactile system so that it's not so scary to be touched by somebody else. But that's what I would suggest. I have a little mini course actually that is designed to help parents understand the rhythmic movements, how to do them, and how to understand why they're so important. And it's only $39. So I would suggest that the mom take that at least and start applying these things at home, because, you know, the babies are going to have to, the more she can do while they're young, the easier her life's going to be. I have no doubt about that. So I would suggest that she gets some kind of training. And also, the other thing that I would say is that if she can lie down on the floor herself and put the baby's belly to belly, and even just little amounts at a time, they need to be prone until they get more familiar with it and more capable. So, but you'll be surprised when you see a baby go in prone and you start rhythmically rocking them, all of a sudden they like prone because they like the rhythm. And that will allow the mom to get more and more prone time with the babies so that they're not just crying the whole time. I've seen that work many times. The other thing you can do, and we didn't show it, but we showed the model in prone, and then we were rocking side to side, but you can also rock longitudinally, like from head to toe, and the babies love that. And every day, those babies need to be in prone several times a day, even if it's just for a few seconds to start. But that is going to help them so much. Once they can be in prone comfortably doing rhythmic movements and sustain that, and every day add a little more, add a few more seconds every day, every day, every day, those kids, you'll see, they'll make huge progress. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. We have another hand that's up, and so I want to get at least another question, and I'm going to unmute. I don't know who it is. It says XT526. Okay.
That's funny.
Whoever had their hand up. Hello? Are you still there? I'm going to try and find them on the video. I don't see anybody actually in the video. So are there any other questions? Oh, there you come. Are you? Nope. Any other questions? Anyone else? Because I certainly have one, if no one else does. Okay, until someone raises their hand, I'm going to ask. So I noticed that you kept saying.
I do have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, just one second, because I was going to ask something. You kept saying, if we're healthy, these will help you if you're healthy. And I noticed that when I work with kids on the spectrum, that their healthy is relative, and there's a lot of toxicity. So can you say something to toxins in the body and how that, I mean, of course it affects the brain in certain ways, but how you see that and how you use rhythmic movement, or just how that all works?
Yes, I'm so thankful for that question, because I want to make sure I'm clear. I have seen these movements work for everybody who does them consistently. The only time theoretically that they wouldn't work is if somebody is so unhealthy that they're practically like every day they're being traumatized just from their environment. But that is like an extreme case, because this works beautifully for children with autism. And let's face it, those children are having a lot of health challenges. They have gut dysbiosis, they have heavy metal toxicity, a lot of things going on, but we still get enormously good results with those children. Number one thing to do to help with the health is to calm the body and to calm the emotions. Because if you can get rid of stress, the health is you have way more resources to be healthy. And I even worked with a little boy who had a horrible diet. He was on chocolate milk and chicken McNuggets, and he was nonverbal. And after 4 months, he was speaking. So, and they hadn't changed his diet at all. So I'm talking about, like, in theoretical, if someone was so traumatized by whatever was going on with their health, then you could say, well, maybe it wouldn't work. But these are innate movements. So it's kind of a big thing to say they work for everybody, because, you're going to get like, well, how, that's impossible. But it's not impossible, because they're our innate movement system. But what, since you brought up health, I do want to just reiterate that it's so important for our health to come out of anxiety. And it's so important just like to move, because we're meant to move, and movement flushes the lymph. It helps us feel relaxed. It helps us feel happy. It helps us feel energized. And we're meant to move. And so this is really good. It's a very good thing to have a movement program just in general for everybody's health. So I hope that's clear.
Thank you. And so that person who was going to ask a question, XT1526, is your ID number anyway.
Oh, I'm Susan. I'm actually calling from Toronto.
Okay.
And I missed the beginning. And so my question is to do with age. For children on the spectrum and the movements, we can move with kids right up to, how old have you worked with?
It works for all ages, from baby to elder.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And we're just using the innate movement system that babies are born, or actually they develop in the womb. And that's most of what we're doing. I teach other integrative movements too that help enhance the integration of the reflexes and rhythmic movements. But yes, it'll work for all ages.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. We have a question about the Moro reflex, and could you show what that is?
Sure. Oh, I can just demonstrate it. So what happens is when every reflex has a stimulus and a motor response. The Moro reflex is actually unusual in that there are many things that could stimulate it. So that's another reason why it really is the sensory integration reflex. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't integrate all of them because they're all super important, but it just means it's the most impactful for the sensory system. And that's because it can be stimulated or activated by a sudden movement of the baby. Like if you had a baby you're holding and you kind of jostle the baby, what they do is they fling the arms out, and the arms abduct, and then they come back in the center and adduct. It's called the stress reflex. It's called the startle reflex. It's called the clinging reflex, because when the baby comes back in, they should be clinging to their caregiver. On the lower half of the body, the legs are doing something similar to the arms. So basically, it's where the baby startles and then usually lets out a cry and then comes back to the center. So most people who are around babies have seen that. So that's the actual movement pattern. It can be stimulated by a loud noise, a sudden change in touch, any kind of sudden change in the environment, of fast visual stimulus, a bright light, anything like that. Yeah.
Thank you. And we have a question from Paula. She says, my son is 2, diagnosed with autism, often plows his forehead around the carpet while crawling, tenses up his arms and hands in front of him often. Can you speak to what sensory stimuli he is trying to get with this behavior?
Could you read that again? He does what with his forehead?
Like plows his forehead around the carpet while he's crawling. So I guess his head is down, and tenses his arms and hands in front of him often. I'm not sure if I don't think those are at the same time, but those may be 2 different things.
Okay. So I come from a different perspective. I come from a little bit of a different perspective about, I don't put things in the framework of sensory seeking or sensory avoiding. I just put it in the framework of brain immaturity, because whether it's sensory seeking or sensory avoiding, it's some kind of brain immaturity. And is your child, what I'm curious is, he's 2, is he walking or is he just crawling? Like, is that his main mode of locomotion, or is he's just doing that and walking, or if not walking yet? So that would be something, I don't know if that comes up in the chat box. He's walking and running fine. Okay. So I can't tell you exactly why he's doing that because I'm not in his body. But what I do know about children with autism is that they tend to be highly anxious, and they tend to have much larger challenges with their sensory system that they're very difficult because they're uncomfortable and possibly even painful if we read the reports by people who have these kinds of challenges, who are able to communicate with us. So it's that I feel that you want to address. You want to address the sensory system and the anxiety by maturing the brain, and then the behaviors change. And we've seen that over and over. We've seen tics go away. We've seen, all kinds of stimming behaviors go away because the system is calm and it's mature and it's organized because you've been able to provide the movement which allows the system to organize itself from the inside out. There's no way you can't change the brain when you do these movements. You will be changing the brain. And then the trick is just to allow the child to be as healthy as possible while you're going through that, because the brain will change and grow with the movement. So that's kind of the approach that I would say would be the most useful approach as far as thinking about that question.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. So it sounds like with kids on the spectrum who are doing kind of stimmy things, or I've heard kids waving their hands in front of them, or banging their heads, or spinning, or various things. It sounds like in almost all those cases, there's this fight or flight and immature brain. And so in any case, whether it's no matter what the stim or the OCD or the movement, is just get them starting with the rhythmic movements.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And one of the things we've seen, because since you brought up OCD, is that OCD behaviors go away. And it's the way that Dr. Blomberg explained that is once you mature the brainstem and the cerebellum, it links up to the front part of the brain, and then that part of the brain kind of comes online. And so you have emotional social development happening, and you have like logic and reasoning starting to develop, depending on the age of the child, of course. But once you can access the front part of the brain, the back part of the brain, which is the survival brain, isn't so anxious. So those OCD behaviors let go, because those behaviors are rooted in anxiety. Those behaviors are rooted in the brain survival system. So once you can make these connections up to the higher parts of the brain, all of a sudden the OCD behavior, it just kind of melts away. Just like that child who didn't have to bite his fingernails anymore because he was now calm. The movements help you be calm. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's see. Oh my gosh, there's a couple more questions, and
you know what, if you want to, I know you want to complete, so just have them email me. I'm happy to answer them over email.
Yeah, it's Cindy and Laura. Yeah, if you go ahead and email to Sonia your remaining questions, because we're going to wrap up, and I appreciate all the questions and all the discussion. So thank you, and I appreciate you, Sonia, for being here to tell parents about these amazing things that can help in so many different. We see what we call symptoms or behaviors, but it just can help so much. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I love talking about this, so I appreciate everybody coming, and thanks for putting this on and bringing us together, Luminara.
Yeah, thank you for everyone. I'm going to stop the recording.